Good evening and welcome to another conversation on Safe Space. My name is Sharice and I am the host of Safe Space podcast. Um, I always have to, let you guys know when I welcome you in that Safe Space is a conversational panel that is intended to be free of judgment, free harassment, and free of emotional harm. We ask that you keep an open mind, be receptive to different perspectives, be okay with being uncomfortable and thinking about different perspectives that you are new to. Um, Today's guest is Jamil Sequoia. So please go ahead and share some things about yourself.
My name is Jamil Sequoia. I immigrated to the United States June 4th of 1994. I did my bachelor's in Nigeria. I have a bachelor's in chemistry. So yeah, I was working in the industry before, but I started teaching in 2000. So I've been teaching physics, chemistry. I've taught all sciences, but now I've been teaching physics now for the past 15 years.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Today, our conversation will be addressing equity and equality in education. More focused on equitable education for students of color. Now, as we get into this discussion, Jamil, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
great, great,
yes,
um,
perfect.
great. Um, One of our first questions, what is the difference between equity and equality? That has been a misunderstanding that has surfaced for a while. What do we mean when we say equity? What do we mean when we say equality?
Yeah, equity is been treating people equally, regardless of their financial, economic, or social status. You're giving them their rights based on what is written down according to the law or the status. When we talk about equity, we're talking about fairness. You have to be fair to everybody. So the difference between equal equality is maintaining people equally. Two plus two is equal to. That's equality. Equity is you're talking about being fair, treating people the way everyone's supposed to be treated. Nobody's cutting the line.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And in this discussion, there are two dimensions that we're going to address with when we're talking about equity, and that is the fairness. Okay, making sure that personal and social circumstances, you know, are met and they're not obstacles in this education. Okay, and the second is inclusion. Basically, like you talked about, the fairness, the minimum standard for everyone. The minimum standard for everyone. We also have another guest that has joined us. Are you there? Wait, did she leave? Okay. Well, once she comes back, I'll have her to introduce herself. Okay. So fairness and meeting the basic minimum standard for education. Now that we have like a foundational understanding of equity and equality in education, why is this necessary? Why is this important for students of color in particular?
Um, every time I look at especially Chicago, for instance,
Mhm.
I don't believe in selective enrollment school.
Mhm.
Every school should be community school where everyone within that community can go to that school. So that the resources can be shared equally among all schools within that community. A community is just like a village, and to develop a village, everybody has to work towards that village so that we can live off all the kids. So if we selecting some kids to go to a different school and some kids go to any kind of school where the funding is lower, that is not equality.
And that's
There is.
exactly what we're doing. We're selecting. So we're choosing who we
Yes,
want to attend these schools, who we want to have a certain amount of access to the resources that
yes,
those schools are being provided. Because
yes,
we know we are on a different playing field with community schools versus our more prestigious selective enrollment
yes.
and what they have to offer.
What do I have to offer? Yes. um when you look at that, and the benchmark for you to grade those schools are the same thing, even though you're giving selective enrollment $100 a month. Just as an example, you're giving community high school $10. And that disparity in spending. Or when you want to evaluate them, you put them on the same scale. That is not fairness.
That is so true. That is definitely true. Um, Jesse Jackson said some decades ago that every basketball court in every school is the same size. You
Yes,
have the access to the exact same basketball court in every school, selective enrollment, community, private school, charter school, it's all the same. But when it comes to the books, the quality of education, the courses that are being offered, then we start to differentiate.
yes,
Then we're not going to offer these courses here because we don't think the students can cut it. The students, are not academically at the level to complete these courses because you yourself, you teach physics or chemistry.
physics.
Yes. And that is a class that's not offered at all of our high schools, especially here in CPS. And
Except
yes, go
except
ahead.
except it just been changed for the past 4 or 5 years now. Every school has to take all sciences,
Mhm.
so it's been changed now.
Okay.
Some years back, not every school do have physics. Yes.
And so why is that? Why did they decide it has to be changed now that everyone can take physics, but prior to that, it was only offered to certain students?
It's part of what we're talking about. There's no fairness, there's no equity within the educational system. We look at science and technology. That is why we have less brown and brown kids majoring in science and technology when you go to colleges, because they are not being exposed. Kids, for kids to do anything kids do in life, we have to teach them how to do it. You have to model what you want kids to do. But if we don't model them, this other alternative of what you have, the kids are not developed to follow that, and that's what's going on.
Now, another issue that I want to address with equity are classroom expectations. How does classroom expectations begin to address the issues of equity in our schools?
In classroom expectation, when you as a teacher, my experience as a teacher for over 20 years is that you have to let students know what you want them to do from day one. And then you have to mold that whatever you tell them. And then the three, you have to let them know if you don't do what you're supposed to do, this is what is gonna happen. And you have to teach every kid equally all the time, even behind them. If your kids come to you behind everybody say, "Oh, Mr. Sequoia, can I turn in my assignment in late?" And I told other kids no. If I accept that one, that is not fairness to me. And that's what I tell the students. I have to be fair.
Now, with that, we have some students, because I know whether or not we're going to continue with homework, some schools have dropped the participation points and the grading scale for homework. How does that play in equity? Is it necessary to have students to complete homework in order for them to be successful students? Should that play a major role in their academic performance?
You know, I'm my philosophy about education. I don't believe in homework too much.
Okay.
It doesn't mean this is what I believe. Every time a kid is in my classroom, whatever he or she has completed at that particular time, when they're about to leave, I collect everything that's done. Now, some teachers will say, "Well, why don't you let them take it home and go and finish it?" And then we have to think about what is going on in the household. My background as a person, I came from a very, very poor background. Sometimes my household, it doesn't allow me to do homework. I always have that in my mind that if a kids go home, they might not bring that paper back. And then they're gonna get a zero. So in my classroom, if I give a kid 10 questions, if it's by the time to leave, if you can do 6 or 7, I'm collecting that paper from you. If you come back the next day that you want to finish it up, I will let you do that. But you're not taking it home. Because if you take home, there's no guarantee it's gonna come back. And that means I'm setting them up for failure. And that's not acceptable by me. One thing that I always tell teachers, if I give a kid, if I give my classes a project to do, if the parents have to buy something to complete that project, eventually, if that student come back to me and said, "Mrs. Koya, I could not do that project because my parents cannot buy the materials for me," guess what I'll do? I'm going to scrap that project. I'm going to give that kid another alternative for them to do. It is unfair as an educator to fail a kid because of a kid parental financial status. That means you're punishing that kid. That's what I believe.
That is absolutely equity in education. That's equity and access. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is so important. And we, as educators, we have to think about that because with equity, everything is not always going to be equal. We have to understand that equity means making sure that the children has access that they are able to succeed and be productive within their understanding.
Yep.
And we have to, because we'll give out the same assignments to everyone in the classroom without considering the levels that our students are performing at.
Yes.
And that is not personalized learning. Personalized learning is so important when it comes
Yes.
to equity in education.
Yes. You know, every year I learn how to do something. Every year, once a quarter, when my kids come into the classroom, we just talk. I choose one day, we just do talking. I, I let them tell me what is bothering them. I let them tell me what education means to them, what is success means to them, what is being what are the, what are the things they want to achieve in their life. By me listening, one thing we don't do a lot, we don't listen to students. I learned because one kid pushed me aside one day a couple of years ago. This kid was a very, very, I mean, he had to do with me every day. He does everything. One day he said he wanted to talk to me. And I said, okay, after class, he came to me. He said, Mr. Sequoia, he said, most teachers don't listen to us. Every time they talk, 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 they won't let us talk. I said, he said, can you start, can you let us talk to you sometimes? I said, okay, come on. So every time I always create time. During my lunch period, my door is always open for kids to come in. Tell me they'll come. I have a very strong relationship with my students, both personal and educational. I still have I still connect with my teacher that I've student that I've taught 14 years ago. I go into my into the marriage, into the wedding stuff like that.
That's good. I know before the pandemic, I had a student that I was very frustrated. He was being very disruptive in class and wasn't completing any work. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to take your recess. So during recess, came up to the classroom. Do you know for an entire week, this kid would come up to my classroom? I said, no, I took your recess once as a consequence. That's it. No, Miss M, I want to come back up to the classroom and have a conversation, just to sit and talk with you. And I find myself, oh my gosh, the kid came up but it was fine. I welcomed him. I had him to bring in his lunch, and we would just sit and talk. And that's all he wanted. At home, he didn't have the opportunity to sit at the dinner table and have a conversation with his parents about whatever was going on. And there was no pertinent issue. It was just a conversation. Did you watch this TV show? And there were some shows that I told him, I was like, well, you're 10 years old. You should not be watching that
Watching
show.
that.
But it was just a conversation that he didn't have at home. And so we have to think about that. Yes, Jesse, connecting is vital. It is so important with our students to have that interaction, to humanize them. They're
Yeah.
more than just data. They're more than just the score that they receive. So we have to understand and make it more personal for them. That
You know,
is so important.
I want to say a story, but it's a long story, but I'm gonna make it really short. I adopted one of my students when she was my student. I started noticing she always come during lunch with her friends. They will come, they will tell me what is going on, then I'll advise them. So from sophomore year to freshman, so when she graduated, she said she wanted scholarship because I was a soccer coach though. So she wanted soccer coach. She wanted soccer scholarship to go to university. There was nobody that step up in her family. I had to sign all the paperwork for her.
Wow.
So I get to adopt her. She married 4 years ago. I gave her away in marriage.
It's beautiful.
She has a baby. She has a baby girl now, which is 2 years old. It is very, very. I mean, I every time I remember about it, is a wonderful thing. I still, you know, I still communicate with her up to today.
That is a beautiful story, to stay connected and to support a student like that. That's awesome.
Yep.
The next question I want to ask: how important is it for us as educators and the district to maintain communication with families in our schools, in our communities? Why is that so important?
According to the data, I just saw this like 3 weeks ago. 10% of our CPS students are white students.
Mhm.
Almost 60 something is Hispanic, and the remainder are African American black students. I look at the teachers force in CPS. I mean, we only have very, very minority African American teachers. Culturally, that is not fair to most of his kids. One thing I realized, if you don't know what a kid is going through, if you don't know their background, sometimes when they're acting up in classroom, you will never understand what they're going through.
That's an empathy component for
Yes,
social emotional. That's
emotional.
so important. So important.
And culturally, the way every race is raised differently in their home. If you don't come from that race, you don't know what they're going through.
Mhm.
You might be thinking the student is lazy. You never know what they're going through at home. So many things happen. So culturally, we have to use that empathy, and we have to be fair. When you look my CPS email, I put it there when you sign after you write your email. I,
Mhm.
I put it there. It says equality and equity equals empathy and sympathy.
Mhm.
So I kind of I talk about all those key forward every day with my students. We have
Mhm.
to use empathy, sympathy, equality, and then so we have to respect each other. We have to be fair. So if I say no to one student, I would say no to everybody.
That is that is very important. Being understanding
Yes.
to what could potentially be going on behind the scenes. Now, the next question um, that has generated a lot of discussion, and this is something that how does it fit into equity? Culturally responsive teaching. Why why does that have to be a part? It is very important to acknowledge the legitimacy of cultural heritage, but why does that play? How does that play in equity?
You know, I started I started like 4 or 5 years ago. I'm a teacher at Carver Military Academy now. I started when we do African American History Month. I started doing African wears fashion show. So I go within the Nigerian community. I ask people to donate their clothing. I will take it to the cleaner. I will wash them. Ironing, make sure is okay. So I will take it to my building. So I will find as many kids to wear those clothes. We will dance African dance, and we take pictures and all those things. You know, one of the students, he went to the army. He was transferred to Japan. I talked to him before COVID hit. One of his younger sisters still go to my school. So he called him over the phone. He was in Japan. And then to my surprise, it was a video call. Can you believe the African garment that I gave him to wear? He took it to Japan. That was so amazing to me. That was so powerful. When he went to his closet, He showed me that clue that I gave him. So, he said he was going to keep that clothes forever. He said it means so much to him that, and he's a kid that when he was in my classroom, you know, he barely listens sometimes. So that's why we don't know how we can influence our kid or our student if we show them culture in education really means a lot. When people know where they're coming from, they cannot do better.
Yes. And then also culturally responsive teaching, it also helps to build a bridge between home and academics
Yes,
and allowing students to have that intellectual strength within their community, within the strength of their family and their heritage,
yes,
making that connect.
yes. So you have to connect that. When every time you never know what you're gonna say, what you're gonna do to change one student. So that's why you have to be mindful of what you say around
Mhm,
students. You gotta be mindful. You never know what you're gonna say that's gonna draw them away or that's gonna bring them closer to you as
mhm.
a teacher.
And also, your curriculum should represent the students that are in front of you,
Yes,
not necessarily the students that you think you will have, but the students that are in front of you. You have to incorporate the different cultures into your information, into your resources, into the material that you're presenting.
yes. So yeah, when we almost finished African American History Month, every day for this past 2 3 weeks, we've been going over every day. I will read accomplishment of African American scientists in 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 changing the world. So and then we're gonna have a discussion before I actually start teaching physics. We do that for this whole month. We do that every day.
Mm. And it is also important that the instructional strategies connect to the learning styles of the students. So when we're thinking about the heritage, we have to also think about how they're learning at home and what we can do to infuse that into our classrooms. And that's another reason why it's so important for us to have that open communication with our
Yes,
families that have different backgrounds, who have different cultures.
yes, and that's why you have to connect with parents. Get to know the parents of your student. Get to understand the needs so that you could reach their child. So that you could infuse the uh, cultural differences between you and the student. I have majority Hispanic kids now. I'm learning Spanish almost every day so that I can continually get closer to each family so that we can talk about the child.
Oh, that's wonderful. That
Yes.
is definitely awesome. And so, what advice or what suggestions do you have um, to educators who are nervous about being that culturally responsive teacher?
You have to teach each you have to be responsible for each kid differently. I don't believe all students you can't teach one. You can't teach the whole class the same way. Some kids you have to test them sometimes verbally. Some kids you have to test them sometimes by writing the test down. Some kids you might want to create a test in a musical way. If they want to be if they want to be a rapper, whatever they want to do, you have to go use different way to assess student so that every kid have a chance of succeeding in your classroom.
Mm, that is so important. Meeting the students where they are academically, culturally, and just understanding their learning styles.
Yes,
Um, with districts, you know, we want to track the data, you know, how's the attendance, but we don't necessarily track their emotional needs.
yes,
It's a lot of foundational issues that take place that we don't track. And I know we have the STLS, and we're trying to make sure that we can support our homeless students, but our students have a lot of emotional deficits, and we're not keeping track of that mental component.
yes. And it affects a lot of things you want to teach a kid. If,
Mhm,
if a student is not stable emotionally, you might not
mhm,
be able to teach that kid anything.
mhm.
So that should be a very, I mean, a very eye bar for you to start with.
And so, with that, how do we systematic? Do we even want to address it systematically, or do we just start as individual educators in our classroom? Do we need policy put in place for that? Is this something that we should just do as individuals?
I think the way something set up in this district that we teach, we have to do it individually. We don't there's no a lot of PDs that is district providing for us to attend so that we can be culturally inclusive in our classroom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a lot of PDs out there for us to do. So it's not, even though we hear it a lot from the district, every time they send document to us, they always put a keyword there: equity, equality. I see that every time, but it's not being done in a very practical way so that we can achieve success over time. It takes a lot of planning to do that.
So being able to respond to diversity in order to give our students the success, that's going to have to come individually from educators.
Yes,
That's something that we're just going to, as not only educators but as humans,
yes,
just being concerned for your fellow human being
yes,
and understanding that this student is going through something, being able to ask those probing questions and being able to know when to push and when to pull back, when
yeah.
to ask the questions and when to allow the students to just have that conversation.
Yes. And then we have to let students know that they can disagree with us.
Mhm.
It's
Because we
called,
don't have all the answers, Jamil.
we
We
don't
don't
have,
have all the answers.
yep, it's called advocacy. They have to advocate for themselves. The only thing I always say them, when you advocating for yourself, just be respectful.
Mhm.
It's okay to disagree with me. It's okay. I always tell my students that all the time. But you have to be respectful.
Because it's also in advocating for themselves, this also gives them the opportunity to have agency over their learning,
Yes,
agency over the environment that they will be learning in. And
yes,
that's something that we don't necessarily do. We want to hold that control. As educators, we're going to control everything, and the students are going to listen to us. And that essentially is not a student centered classroom.
no, it's not.
That's another important part of equity, having a student centered classroom.
Yeah, and as a teacher, you don't just want to be talking all day and the kids just sitting down there. Kids don't learn that way. That's one thing. They kids learn by interacting with each other. That is why even though we have COVID now, I can't wait to go back. I
Mhm.
do I do miss the student too.
I do. I did. I definitely was an educator that took for granted the interaction that I have with my students. I am one of those individuals that when I see my students, I do give the hugs. We're talking, we're in close proximity of each other, that it is going to be really difficult going back into the building knowing that, okay, I can't stand next to the student can't touch me, I
Can't touch
can't
you.
touch the
Can't
student.
touch you.
Yes,
It's
social
gonna be tough.
distance.
Yeah.
Yes. We always have the students are going to have a difficult time with maintaining social distance. Educators, we're going to have the difficult time also
Yes.
with maintaining the social distance.
Yep. Even one of my colleagues, we were talking. We're having a meeting some time ago. He said, he used to stay in his classroom. He doesn't come out. He doesn't walk around to talk to other teachers. He said, man, I miss all of you. He said, I took it for granted. I wasn't coming out of my classroom. He said, he said, I can't wait to come back so that I can go and talk to everybody. Because now he's at home by himself talking to nobody.
You feel so isolated.
He's
I know I'm
isolated.
here in my daughter's old bedroom, which I made into my office, and it's like I don't have, my co-teacher where I can step out of the classroom and talk, or if I see other students walking down the hallway, they stop in my class and speak. I was like, no more of that. I miss that. I definitely miss that. And
Yep.
I know I was one of those teachers, a student, hi, Miss M. I was like, aren't you supposed to be in class? Get to class. What I would give to be able to do that now, and it's different.
It's
It's
different.
different.
We're in a
And we
different
also
world.
have to understand that it has impacted our students.
Yes.
We have to be ready for the emotional implications that this has caused them.
Yes. I don't even know how to approach it. But I guess when we get there, we deal with that.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, this has been such an enriching conversation, speaking about equity in education, understanding the difference of equity and equality. I want to thank you so much for joining me um, this week in our conversation in Safespace. Thank you so much. And I do hope you are able to come and have a conversation with me again. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
Um, this is the end of Safe Space for this week. Please make sure you join me again next week, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. But make sure you take a moment and shine your light in the dark. Thank you and have a good evening and be safe.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.